if you are just starting out and you want to do something a little crazy, but you want to actually build the best product, charge monthly only. Because that means users can leave whenever they want. And if they can leave whenever they want, everybody's going to be thinking about how can we get this customer to stick around.
Welcome back to Horizons Podcast, where I convince marketing leaders to spill their secrets for the rest of us. Today, I'm here with Joe Wilkinson. Joe helped scale Lucid past 100 million in annual recurring revenue, and now advises early-stage startups on product-led growth and turning visitors into customers through his boutique agency, Artisan Strategies. Joe, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Nate. I'm excited to be here.
First question that I'd love to hear more about is you start off in a very unusual path. Back during your college days, I believe you were advising at a fund called University Venture Fund across different verticals like social gaming, big data, electronic vehicles. How did that early experience change the way you think about marketing and business in general?
Yeah, it influenced a lot. Before that path, I was studying economics. There really are kind of two options when you do something like that. You can go the PhD route, or you can go do something completely unrelated. And tying in with the venture fund, so the University Venture Fund, University Growth Fund is what they've now rebranded to. They were at the time the largest student-run venture capital fund in the nation. They were fully run. And so, a lot of them were maybe tied for a VC fund, or there were scouts or something like this. But this had LPs we'd go pitch to, we'd go explain stuff to. And so it meant that, one, we got to work really closely with some of these other well-known VCs at the time, but we also got to see the companies would work really closely with us and sort of say, hey, this is actually, they give us a very real pitch of how they were thinking about things. We'd see how the VC would respond to it. We would develop our own view on it. And then sometimes we'd go and pitch it to our LPs and, or I guess at this time, our investment committee. And so that was the one way we got to manage the money. We'd have to sort of get final approval from some proper investors, and we'd get to hear their feedback, and they'd be very honest with us, very transparent. And so that, helped me get really exposed to the world of tech. And then through that, we would go to conferences like TechCrunch. We'd go there a bunch of times. We'd go to CES, all these things that when you're a student, especially, it's just like, wow, this is a whole world. This is especially when TechCrunch was, kind of the Michael Arrington days, like Zuckerberg was on the stage at a time, and a few of these other things where there was just like a lot of stuff happening in tech around TechCrunch Disrupt. And so from there, basically I kind of stumbled into growth, which was this world of, if you will, a combination of economics and startups, because growth to me is really, how do you think about user behavior and what they're doing and what actions people are taking, tied with data, tied with math and numbers and how you change things. And so that, both the econ degree and the University Venture Fund kind of combination sort of led me to where I am now.
It's incredible. If I understand correctly, you mentioned talking with a bunch of other venture capitalists. I believe you're even engaged at times with Andreessen Horowitz. What was your experience seeing how these VCs thought about the problems they're approaching?
They'd all think about it in their own way, and we engage with them in different ways. And so sometimes they may say, hey, we are going to lead this investment. Do you all want to join? And we'd understand why they had an investment thesis around this company or this product. And we would get to go develop these investment memos. So they were, I don't remember, probably 30-page memos or something now, where we'd break down the market and the team and if they had a product and if they had a business at that point, what's there, where they're getting users from, why they're getting users from these places, how scalable it is. And other times they would say, hey, this industry is going to be a really big industry. We think it's really, really important. We think, you can think of AI now, but back then it was like the world of like social, local, mobile was a lot of the things. So they'd be say like, hey, we think this area of social is going to be huge. Can you go do a deep dive on this? And we have to understand it really, really fast. Not Andreessen, but a different firm at the time was like, hey, we're looking at, these different database companies. Tell us which ones are the best and what's going to happen in the database world over time. And it's like, I don't know anything about databases at the time, right? How do I learn about this? How do I think about this? And you'd run into these art where you'd understand what happens to a business, or at least how people would perceive it. And over time, you got to see. So there was a competitor to GoPro, as an example, that sort of surfaced. And the students were actually really optimistic on this. Hey, we should totally put money in this. We think it's going to be huge. And the pushback we got was basically, this is how a lot of the dynamics in consumer technology go, which is that the prices plummet. They become commoditized. You end up relying a lot on marketing, and it's hard to overcome the market leader, which was GoPro. And we didn't believe it at the time. Oh, no way. How come we can't get the investment for this? Or we were fine. But, you kind of are skeptical of that reasoning. And then you watch it and it was 100% true. And you can play that out now, where I think a lot of people don't do it today. But one of the things that's been really helpful to me in mapping that is thinking about how the art of a business goes. One of the things that I say to companies is, if you are matching what the leader is doing and you're number two, you're going to lose. Like, there's just nobody who's going to go say, hey, go try number two when you're the same price, when you have slightly fewer features and your marketing is not as good. And it's a hard fact, but that was in part, for example, directly informed from the investors thinking on this specific company. And I pushed back on it at the time, similar reasoning, and they were 100% right.
It's incredible. And to get to watch your predictions either come true or not come true and then learn from that. Mm-hmm. I feel like one of the challenges for us as humans is we're very good at not actually learning from things. We make a prediction, but then we don't go back and assess whether that prediction was right or wrong and how we would change our decision making. It sounds like you've actually done that assessment. How has this time of seeing your predictions and having a few years go by, how has that changed the way you think about businesses today?
It's changed a lot. It's changed a lot, both in the tactical and the general, because there's this Steve Jobs video where he's talking about the time that somebody gets in a company, how it changes your perspective. And it's very true, both being able to watch it from the investor time, but also, spending 6 years at Lucid or so. We got to do stuff on the growth team where we then were later able to look back and say, man, that was really dumb, or that was really, really smart. And you can look at, it's always hard. There's no very clear answer, because you could look back and say, hey, you know what? We push hard, for example, maybe to get people to pay. And that allowed the company to exist, right? We couldn't have existed if we didn't get people to pay. But we then later had to respond to that through maybe product changes, to improving the product, to increasing activation and retention and churn. And so all of these things, very specifically, I'll give you an example that I've pitched. I've said it on LinkedIn. I think it's a little controversial, but I've seen it with companies that work, which is, if you are just starting out and you want to do something a little crazy, but you want to actually build the best product, charge monthly only, because that means users can leave whenever they want. And if they can leave whenever they want, your entire business, your customer support, your product team, your growth teams, your sales team, your finance team, even, everybody's going to be thinking about, how can we get this customer to stick around? Which means, what is the product we're going to build for them? How are we going to change the way things work so they stick around? And then later on, even if you want to switch fully to annual and you no longer have monthly, you're going to benefit from all of those improvements that you changed and you implemented. And so that is a very tactical thing that was very directly informed from watching things evolve. Because if you do the opposite, you can create this great cash flow where you start at annual, but it's going to be really hard to put the focus into, how do I keep people active? How do I keep people engaged? How do I activate people into the product?
And now a word from our sponsor. It's me. I'm actually not taking any sponsors in season 1, but I just wanted to say thank you for listening. It's been such a joy recording these episodes, and I hope you enjoy them as much as I have. If you would like to support the podcast, the single most impactful thing you can do is leave a 5-star review wherever you're listening. This will help new people discover the podcast. And if you have someone in your life who's passionate about marketing, send this their way. They'll probably love diving into these insider tactics and stories. With that, back to the conversation. That's a fascinating way of thinking about it. So almost start off in hard mode, so that if you then go into easy mode later, you have a lot of the pieces in place. That's incredible.
Yeah.
Speaking of Lucid, you were one of the first 50 employees there, if I understood correctly.
That's right.
What was the first 90 days like coming into that company?
Yeah, I love Lucid. It's a fantastic company. It's a fantastic place, incredible leadership. And I still talk to people at Lucid, even years later now, just basically almost not quite daily anymore, but weekly. And one of the great things is I think Lucid, they tried really, really hard to hire people they thought were really incredible and then let them kind of go. It meant they weren't necessarily incredibly prescriptive either. I used to joke with people who would later on say, there's not enough onboarding. We need to get more structure, because I showed up and it was like, here's some cool articles I think would be helpful, and we need to make a lot of money. Like, okay, like, let's go. Where's data? Do we have it? I remember asking, like, what is a cherry pick? And the engineer, I was like, they're like, we're going to cherry pick this out to production. It's like, what's a cherry pick? Like, I don't know what this is, stuff like that, where it was just like, jump in and we're going to try and be successful. And I think like there were no models for growth at the time. We weren't called growth at the time. We were called the revenue team. And so
Interesting.
it was just like, hey, there's like some engineers, and your job is to sort of shift things around to go find money. That was the premise entirely. And you had Facebook and LinkedIn who had done growth really as a well-known thing. And again, it's this hard mode world, but it worked out because there weren't necessarily playbooks. We had to think from first principles. So we'd be like, well, if we wanted more people to convert, where do they convert? Well, let's go look at the experience and see what things are causing people to convert. How do we run a test? Is this a good way to run a test, or is this a bad way to run a test? And how do we make good decisions? I mean, even later on, we started building out systems where we were saying, let's look back at tests we've run and see if that was a year later a good decision. And so these were all just things we had to come up with from first principles, and we can dive into any number of them if you want. But it was really just the first 90 days where let's go, and you're off running and figure everything out. Like, we happen to have an example of data. I see this still today. A lot of companies do it, even though data as an infrastructure layer has gotten better. But it was like the engineers were just tracking everything. So, somebody clicked in, put in a button click on the front end, and that was tracked. And then another engineer wanted to track it on the back end. So that was tracked. They were separate, right? So they're just like these two events happening. They're the exact same events. There was stuff like that. And somebody had decided that like KISS metrics would be really cool to add. I don't know if you remember KISS metrics, but it was like the original amplitude basically. And so we just like commandeered that on the growth team. We're like, okay, like we're going to build our version of analytics that we know is right and real and accurate. And let's just start tracking what we need to track. Stuff like that.
Incredible. And just for those who might not be familiar, can you briefly explain what was Lucid when you joined and what has it become today?
Yeah, so it's still at the base level pretty similar. So if you think about flowcharts, diagram, processes, you want to visualize with boxes and lines how people are moving through an experience. The main competitor at the time was Microsoft Visio. That's really what it was at the core. And so, engineers, process people inside companies, product people doing, simple wireframes were the main company. And that's still, from what I understand, their bread and butter, what they're doing a lot. They're doing some really clever stuff with how you connect things, but that's the top level core. And then they have a whiteboarding product that we've seen all over the place where, if you're in Zoom and you want to have a quick brainstorm, they have a whiteboarding product called Lucid Spark. So those are the main things that they're doing. They might have some other stuff that I haven't kept as closely on them, but that's roughly, they were doing that the entire time that I was there.
I was reading on LinkedIn, David Groh, the CEO, recommended you quite strongly. And one of the things he said that struck me was that you brought a keen intellect, a natural curiosity, and a willingness to learn. And if you were to be hiring people at this early stage, set them free within your company to make everything happen, what would you say is the mindset that's required for growth?
Oh, man. So I learned a lot of this. Dave Davis is an amazing example, because one of the things that he would also do is if he disagreed with you, he would let you do it as long as you knew how to understand that the thing you were doing was the wrong thing, right? So, hey, I want to go make like our pricing page pink or whatever. Like, not that we ever wanted to do that, but let's say you wanted to do that. Great. How would you know that users didn't like this and they didn't convert? Okay, you know that, you have a solid opinion about it and you really believe in it. Okay, go run it and then come back to me and tell me the results, right? Stuff like that. And so that allows this attitude. So to your point, a mindset of growth needs to be really, you need to be a little bit of the sort of the cowboy, if you will. Like a lot of times, like growth will ruffle feathers a little bit. They're going to go push these things that people say you should never change. Hey, we can't change our pricing. We can't change our way our pricing works. We can't activate this way. No, our business model is this or that. Growth is going to push up against all of those and question them. And they're not going to bring an ego to it. So it's just going to be like, hey, our job is to accomplish X. If we stop doing Y and we do Z, will we accomplish X more or less? And if you can, then you're going to be successful, right? Hey, okay, it accomplishes X. Let's keep going. Let's do more of that. And so you need to have someone who's okay to sort of push those boundaries and move forward and try things. And so then there's that experimentation mindset that's sort of, you're going to bump against the walls and you're going to try these different things. And then you're going to kind of update on this feedback loop where you say, okay, like I tried this thing and it turns out it was really a terrible idea. And you just need to be fine with that. Like, that's okay. Some of the best in class growth teams are failing 80% of the time. Like, that's a lot to be missing and to be updating. And so I always say, like, the way you're successful in growth is how many tests you're running and the quality of those tests. And so that attitude is not just do they need to fail, but what they need to do is you need to say, why did they fail? And this is a little bit of a, hardcore data people don't necessarily love this, but I feel adamant about it, which is you need to look at this. And when you run a test, it's not just yes or no. It's what does this tell us? And you don't need to go and make it now like canon for your company and say, well, you can never use prices that end in 7. But you need to say, hey, well, we changed this and it really changed behavior. And so what is the opposite of this? What is something, maybe it changed behavior in a good way? How do we change behavior in a good way that helps more of this? And then you just go test it again. And so you need to keep getting these informed. So this like, really hungry, low ego, willing to try a bunch of stuff, and this focus on just accomplishing the goal, regardless of the other sort of, bureaucracy, if you will, in some ways that come around with it.
To be the person who cuts through that and makes it happen. You ran over 1,000 A/B tests at Lucid. Mm-hmm. What was the distribution of successful, neutral, unsuccessful?
It was probably similar to that 20% success. Depending on how hard we push, maybe it would drop down to, I don't think we ever got below 15%. We definitely got up around 35% of tests that were successful. I thought about things in sort of a portfolio manner, if you will. And so what we do is we would have some amount of our time always around exploring thematic things, if you will. So, hey, we've never tested whether showing a paywall that breaks down all of the benefits and looks the same across the product was been good or not. So let's go try this because we have no knowledge here. It's brand new, fresh knowledge. And then you have some tests that come out of that where you say, oh, clearly, like this is a really good thing. So one easy one might be, let's test something for different geographies. Can we show, for example, simpler pricing pages for people? Wow, there is something there. That's really interesting. Let's go now spend a bunch of cycles really going deep on this idea. How much can we change stuff? How simple can we make it for specific groups? If you come through a page that actually requires that you pay more, you need one of our higher levels, and a bunch of people are choosing the free level and getting upset because they choose paywalls. Can we simplify this a lot? And so this is stuff that's where that would shift. And when you get into that area, your success rate goes up because you have that information from the exploratory phase. But you have to have that exploratory phase. Otherwise, you're going to run out of things to test in a way. You're going to say, well, let's only do the things we have high confidence in. And eventually you run out of things you have high confidence in.
I love that thinking about. So you'd say, okay, we're curious about this area of simplified pricing, do an initial test. If that's promising, boom, 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 do all these follow-on tests to get more granular.
Yeah, exactly. And we do it across the board.
Amazing.
So, hey, if we change the way the onboarding modal looks, like, is there space on the onboarding modal? Can we change it? Can we improve it? Can we adjust it? Oh, there is. Okay, let's spend a lot of cycles on activation and see what we can happen with the onboarding modal specifically in activation. Can we change it by personalization? Maybe not, but can we send this message or this message? Actually, this message resonates. Let's actually now pull that message out into other places and let's test it in emails. Let's test it on the landing pages. Let's test it deeper in the product.
How do you ensure you got a sufficient sample before making a decision? One of the things I often find very challenging in experimentation is you only have so many users. You start splitting them across a bunch of different experiments. It could take a month or 2 months or 3 months to get a really solid answer. How did you achieve a high enough degree of confidence in a relatively short period of time?
Yeah, so there's a few approaches to that. So at the time, we used standard frequentist testing. We looked for 95% statistical significance. You'd run it for sort of the proper amount of time, so it's powered enough and significant enough, and you'd feel good about it. You just basically say, let's run it. What we'd always say with the time is most people, where you're going to get pressure is not on implementing your wins faster. It's on stopping a thing that's ruining the experience. And so you don't have to wait for statistical significance when you're like crushing payments. It's like, hey, no one on the B arm is paid and you have like 50 payments on the A arm. What are you doing? Just turn it off. And so we always felt we would never stress about turning off a loss too early. You have to separate out what you learned from that loss. You can say you learned nothing. That's okay.
Yeah.
But you can say, that's fine. It didn't work. We don't know what didn't work about it, but it's clearly like a really bad thing. So we'll turn it off. We'll revisit it. Maybe we'll launch another test. Maybe we lost like a lot of like cultural sort of allowance in that area. So we won't even revisit again. That's okay, right? If you're running 300 tests a year, like you can afford to not have one that you run. And then when you implement it, what we really didn't want is anyone to be able to question the good things that we implemented, because that starts to happen, right? People say, hey, like, why is there a paywall here? Maybe we shouldn't have paywalls anymore. Like we hear that sometimes. Hey, can we just not have a paywall?
Yeah.
And it's like, well, this paywall makes us, make up a number by $500,000 a year or something. Is it worth getting rid of that? Like maybe it is, but let's talk about it and let's do it knowingly. And it's harder to do that without statistical significance. Now, as I work with companies that are smaller and smaller and they need to move faster, what I say is, look, some is better than none and more is better than less. So if you run a test and you run it in a Bayesian framework, so you're just kind of looking at likelihood of being better, and you get to a place where you feel comfortable with it being more likely to be better, then ship it and move forward. And then try and run your second test. And then try and run your third test. And so I think you can dip your toe in the water of just being a little bit more informed, because the opposite of this that people don't talk about a lot is you're basically testing no matter what. It's just in one version, you're testing on half your users, and the other one, you're testing on 100% of your users, right? You're just dropping it in and saying, I hope this works. And the issue is, even if you don't have enough data, you at least have two different groups, and you can form some sort of an opinion that can help you. And at least you can even say, hey, A group had 5.5% conversion of this flow, and B group had 5.9% conversion of this flow. And we only had 100 people in each group or something. So whatever, 5 versus 6 or something like that. So now you know sort of the magnitude and what you're talking about. The alternative that doesn't get brought in a lot is if you were to do that without testing, you would have shipped this and you would have had 200 people go through the flow, and you maybe would have gone from 10 conversions a week to 12 conversions a week. But it turns out that like also there was this really cool PR thing that got mentioned that brought you up, and it 50% increased the people who went to your site. So was those additional two people from that? Or in fact, were those two additional people overcoming that because the people who came from PR were way lower quality? Not that you're going to get to a perfect answer, but I'll tell you that sucks when you're even at a more confused place. We made this change, some stuff happened, and we don't know. Something happened, right? And so that's what testing at least allows you to sort of develop a heuristic on variance, is what I'll say. Like, how much does this normally move? And did we move it a little bit more or not? And how do we think about it?
That makes a lot of sense. And that is really the challenge, is how can you isolate the one thing that made the change versus, we also had PR, we also had this change to our landing page, which made the difference. To get really nerdy for just a minute, you mentioned earlier using frequentist approaches to A/B tests at Lucid, and now thinking about, for smaller companies, Bayesian sometimes being appropriate. Can you break down what are the pros and cons of each, and also what are they?
Oh man, I'll do my best. And all the caveats of I'm not a data scientist guy, and it's been some time since I've had to get like deep in the weeds and hash this out with the data teams. But basically the premise is with Frequentist, It was developed a long time ago, I don't know, 1,000 years ago or something, who knows, where you want to do these really isolated time-bound studies. So you would say, let's, for example, have crops, and we need to figure out which fertilizer is going to be more effective with these crops. And we're going to plant, in field A, and we're going to plant in field B. We're going to fertilize field B with this, and we're going to fertilize field A with this other thing. So how many crops do we need in each field? What is the full arc that we need to look at this? How long do they need to grow? And how many more crops on B do we need to have as an end result to feel really, really confident that the fertilizer was actually better? And this makes sense. It's really nice. And there's a lot of good reasons to go that way. But what Bayesian sort of said is you actually have some model of the world already. And that influences sort of the reality. Like you don't have to pretend like you have no idea, right? Because that's what frequentist is. It's like, we have no idea. Let's do this. And like, surprise, B is clearly better. The joke I've heard is like, the frequentists are surprised every day when the sun rises. Like the sun rises, whoa, I didn't expect that. That's amazing. But Bayes is like, well, we've seen the sun rise, I don't know, 100 million times at this point. We could probably reasonably expect the sun will rise tomorrow. It might not. We'll account for that in our Bayesian reasoning, but we have all of these historical sunrises, so we can think about it that way. So Bayes does that. It says sort of, hey, what do we sort of expect to happen? What is a reasonable amount of this? The example I've heard is like, if you have a bucket of potentially white jelly beans and red jelly beans, and you pull out a red jelly bean, what is the likelihood that there's more red than white? Well, it was 50-50, but when you pulled out the red, it now bumps up to, 65, 70%. So I don't know the exact percentage. And then if you pull out another red, it bumps up again, and it bumps up again. And so it allows you to sort of take what you see. Whereas if you start at this test and you start seeing a bunch of conversions, is it likely that there's probably more conversions coming from this? Like, yeah, it is. And that's how, if you listen to executives talk when they're looking at A/B tests, they never talk about the frequentist model. They don't say, hey, this p-value of 0.05, like, it's either, if it's 0.06, right, in frequentist, it's done, it's gone. Like, you can't count it. You can if you're maybe in academia and you do the p-hacking and all that stuff, but basically, like, it's binary. You were successful or not. But in Bayesian, you literally say, hey, this is 94% more likely to be better. And there's a bunch of underlying math that makes this valid. Like, you're not just like making stuff up and just sort of saying, yeah, we got like 10 on this one and we got 3 on this one, so this is probably better, right? You can put it into a tool, actual proper mathematical rigor. It's telling you this. And then you can say, hey, we think this is like 90% better than the A-arm. Can we ship it and can we roll with it? Yeah, makes sense. Let's move forward.
That's awesome. So essentially, it allows you to move faster. This is such a great explanation. I love the crops. And I think that really brings it home that frequentist is made for a world where you have to plant the crops, you water the crops, you wait for them to grow, and then you harvest. And then at that final end stage, you see, okay, we got 15 bushels of corn from this field. Versus in the modern world, when you're working at a tech company, you don't wait 3 months to get all of your signups at once. You get a sign up today, another sign up tomorrow, another paid start the day after. And so Bayesian allows you to take that early indication into account to identify the probability that this arm is going to do better than this other arm. Also, just a sidebar really quickly, I love that you brought up p-hacking. It's such a fascinating concept to me. For anyone who's not aware, p-hacking is basically the idea that when you're operating with 95% likelihood of accuracy, that means you come back and you say, okay, version A is 95% likely to be better than version B. And that's highly accurate. That's what we call statistical significance. However, that also means 1 in 20 times you're likely to get a false positive. And so p-hacking, at least as I understand it, is essentially if you throw 20 different variations and you say, okay, we test in, say, science, we test taking rosebuds every morning and we test it across 40 different things, it's very likely 2 of those will show up as statistically significant, 1 in 20, even if they're actually not. And so the idea of p-hacking is you throw enough variables in that something shows up as stat sig, but it may not actually be stat sig. It might just be the randomness of 1 in 20. If you want to avoid p-hacking, you need to test fewer things and know upfront what you're actually testing rather than just waiting to see what pops up. So that's very exciting.
It is, yeah.
So you were going to say,
that's how I understand it. My understanding is you can, there's always this debate in at least at the time when people are doing Frequentist stuff, do you do 99? Do you do 95? And do you 90? And if you don't agree to that beforehand, and you have something come in that's a 94% confident, you're like, this is actually 90% that we were shooting for. That was our goal. And it's like, no, that's not how it works, but okay.
Which is counterintuitive because it can feel like, it's 90%. Why not just like, it's pretty close. We're directionally confident, but actually statistically that becomes very problematic and you start laying a lot of non-accurate results into your data set if you are playing around on the end of your test rather than setting the expectation up front.
That's right. Yeah.
You've written about not all clicks being equal. Can you share more about the origin story of where that came from and how people should think about the value of different clicks?
What you hear a lot at companies, and you even get this from AI chatbots when you ask them what to do better, is they'll say you need to remove friction. You need to get this out of your product. You need to get rid of it. You just need to move people in and get them there right away. The reason that comes from not all clicks are created equals is this idea of like, people are like, oh, it should take 2 clicks to get to the value proposition, or it could get to this, you need to get there right away. And one of the questions that I pose for people is, if you play video games, why do you spend 30 minutes in onboarding? Right? Like most video games have this huge onboarding. You got to like, not all of them, but you got to go through this like tutorial of how you actually control the game, and you got to figure out where you're going, and you got to name your character and design your character, and then you got to like learn how to like move your sword and all these things, depending on what you're doing. And no one complains. No one complains. Why do they complain? And why do they complain about your SaaS app that takes like 5 clicks to get in? And the reason is that, one, you're not actually adding any value as you're going through it, right? A lot of your clicks are for yourself as a company. You're saying, well, hey, are you the CEO? Because we really want to send you a bunch of emails. Okay, you're the CEO. How big is your company? We want to know which kind of like salesperson we should have you go talk to. And everyone knows this. When you go through, they're like, this sucks. This is annoying. I don't know what you're doing. Why are you here? And it's not helpful. And so the flip side, though, if you were to walk in and you say, hey, look, we have this product. There's a bunch of different things that we can do in this product, and we want to know what you're here for. Oh, well, I'm here. Lucid dealt with this in a big way. So this you internalize a lot because we're this massive general purpose app. Someone would come to create org charts, and someone would come to map out their process internally, and someone else would come to like do UI mockups. And they might all have like the exact same title. They might all be like VP of engineering. And so we're like, how do we actually figure out who this person is? But it was also a confusing product when you get in. Not necessarily confusing, but not everyone knows how to like think about diagrams natively. So they'd be like, hey, go map this thing out. They're like, I don't know, what is this? I've never used Visio before. They got a Visio document from an engineer. And so I see this with a lot of apps that I work with now today, where it's like, look, if you just get rid of every single click, it's sort of like just like having somebody run and removing like all the stairs and they just like stumble and fall. And so what you want to do is kind of give them this sort of environment that makes a lot of sense. I think I used an analogy of like you go into a bar, right? And when you go into a bar, you have like, you're going to go and give your ID or something. You're going to go order a drink. You're going to walk in there, and it's all in process and in service of the end result of like having a good time. And it's the same, like you go to a restaurant, you go talk to the hostess, you go talk to your seat, you get out the menu, you look at what you want, you tell the waitress. And again, nobody complains about these things because they're getting your end result. And so when you're going into a product, if you're genuinely saying, hey, look, like you could be person A or you could be person B, and we really want to help you accomplish this, I think people generally will understand this and say, well, I'm here to create org charts. That's what I really, really want to do. Okay, we're going to help you figure out how to get org charts. And you can see this, abstract way, even if you're doing AI, like, are you coming to ChatGPT because you want to have conversations and you want to use voice mode? Or are you trying to build out and create more structured documents and solve hard problems? Then you can do both. But even if you start out with those kind of questions, I think people are open to it. And then I call it basically maintaining momentum. You need to give people these reasons of like, okay, I'm moving forward. I get it. I'm going to the right place. And it's not these gimmicks of just little tiles. It's the type of questions and the way you interact with people. And then you can say, here's your result. This is exactly what you wanted. Wow, that's great.
That's incredible. And it is very much like computer games. Rather than just saying, okay, we want to remove all friction. Instead, say, how can we give you value early on, upfront, quick returns on the investment you make in giving us certain pieces of information such that you want to go further? Is this basically the concept of product-led growth?
At a core, yeah, I think it is. If you were to summarize it, I think that's a good way to summarize it. If you look at the evolution of like where did the term product-led growth came from this venture fund that I think is no longer in existence called OpenView. But the general idea was, hey, we're going to basically ship enterprise software where we're going to start with the end user. And if you're starting with the end user, it means it needs to be consumer grade, essentially. A lot of these old softwares, they're not consumer grade, that even within the enterprises today, let alone the large old enterprises, they're MS-DOS sometimes and all these different things. But you want to get this adoption. So you want to go and make something that, you, Nate, is like, yeah, this is great. This is way better than anything I've ever used. So I'm going to make sure I use it because I want to use it. And then basically the company will either have to overrule you and make everyone unhappy, which they don't really want to do because you're also unproductive. You're getting productive. Or they say, hey, why don't we just buy this thing that everybody at our company is using in the first place? So yeah.
And this was a bit of a revolution 5 or 6 years ago, at least as I saw it in the enterprise tech world, of going from we primarily operate through sales and we primarily operate through convincing the decision makers to buy the product and then apply it to the whole company, switching that to grassroots of we convince individual humans within the company to become advocates for a product, and then they convince the decision makers to buy it. How have you seen that work out across the industry?
In which way are you? A lot of different ways. We can go down any path here. And so,
like, would you say, maybe a different way of putting it, what percentage of enterprise sales today would you say are made through this new grassroots model versus the older sales to the executive model?
So if you need an end user, I don't know the exact percent, but I wouldn't be surprised if it's over 50%. The unique difference though is if you are a business that an end user is clearly using and getting the most benefit from, it might be more closer to 80 or 90%. It might be a lot of people that are doing the product-led growth model. Where you see that not be as true always in the enterprise is there are sometimes things that are still going to get adoption in a sales first motion because their core value is actually to the leadership. So you might have some of these, for example, AI sales phone recorder calls. Like a sales rep isn't necessarily going to benefit from having an AI recorder on the call. There's a micro piece to it that they'll benefit from, but it's really going to be the sales leader that really wants to know if you're saying the right words, why conversations are failing, why you're seeing churn. And so that motion, you can follow a product-led growth motion to hit the sales leader, but you kind of have to start at the team level at a minimum, or you go tops down. You go to the VP of sales and say, hey, roll this out across your whole team, tell every salesperson they have to go use this. And so that's the key differentiator of where product-led growth has seen like massive adoption and where it hasn't quite gotten as adoption. I think you can still take product-led growth principles and apply it in the tops-down motion, but you do have to enter at a level that's a higher level and have it get pushed down.
And how do you go about, so when I think about product-led growth, I think of it as a maybe slightly slower sales cycle, and perhaps this is my misconception. The first have to convince the end user of the product to use it, and then they have to convince the purchaser of the product to buy it for the company, and then the purchase is made. How do you account for that in A/B testing, which particular product-led growth thing is having an impact on your sales?
Well, hopefully you're still monetizing at the base level. And so I'd say the sales process is maybe slower on the aggregate, but you're sort of getting these micro wins along the way. And so instead of going from 0 to 100,000, you're going from 0 to 100 to 200 to 1,000 to 10,000 to 50,000 to 100,000. And so those are the mechanisms that are at play where even on the A/B testing, the product-led growth, you're reaching out these, in fact, broad groups of people. So you have a higher number of people that you can learn an A/B test from versus an enterprise where you're, on the very high end, there's people who make a product only for 500 companies, right? It's like the Fortune 500 and that's it. Because that's a unique problem that they have and nobody else has. So product-led growth, these are all end users. They're all using it. So there's millions and millions, hundreds of millions sometimes if you're global. And so you can get these little wins along the way. You can get these purchases. And in fact, one of the things that can happen is you can actually flip them over into an enterprise deal sometimes very early and very fast, and then have it grow within the enterprise. And so again, in the tops down motion, you have to go to the sales VP of sales and say, hey, you have 1,000, 2,000 salespeople. You need to roll this out across everybody. There's all these things you need to overcome. You need to convince them it's definitely not going to make them look stupid. And they're going to be really, really in the right place and they're going to hit their sales goal. And the CEO is going to be happy with them, but all the reps are going to be happy with them along the way too. There's all these things, right? And there's people who are really good at that product-led growth. Even in that sales example, let's say it's not an individual rep. Well, you can come in and say, hey, sales team, you're a manager. You have 5 reps underneath you. You want to be the best team in your group, and maybe you're in the corporate division or something. Go add our product, and you're going to make everybody else look like fools because you're going to be so good, and they're going to be really good. And so now the team next over is going to be, well, what are they doing that's so much better? And let's adopt it. And so then when does the enterprise sale properly happen? At that first team, at that second team, when IT flips over and signs the deal, when VP of sales signs the deal because he wants it, you're at 80% penetration, he wants it at 100%. It's hard to say, but that's how product-led growth tends to work.
It's incredible. So not only does it give you a stronger sales cycle into an organization, it also gives you better indicators earlier on in the product lifecycle of what actually matters to the end users of the product.
Yes.
You've now worked across dozens or probably even hundreds of startups in your consultancy. What are the most common misconceptions you found about product-led growth?
So 2 different angles that some of the most common misconceptions come in. The first is that you hear people who say, we're not a fit for product-led growth. We're B2B in this way. It's just not going to work. You say, why? Have you tried? What have you done? But no, product-led growth is not us. And then the total other side of the spectrum are people who say product-led growth is going to solve everything. And because it has product in the title, it's just product. We don't need marketing. We don't need anything. Just product is going to go make us a billion-dollar company. And so those are the 2 very extreme misconceptions that you hear. And they're still, I would say, like quite common out there.
That's amazing. Okay, switching completely to a different area. You've written a lot about data and the value of data. You also have written a bit about where data can be wrong or go in the wrong direction. Companies that you mentioned have a tremendous amount of data, great data infrastructure, but they're struggling to make the right decisions. They're going backwards as business. What do you think causes this for these companies?
Yeah. So let me talk a little bit about my journey to getting here, and then we'll talk about it. So as I talked about earlier in the conversation, where when you look at a growth person, a lot of what they're doing is taking these heuristics and these behavioral and the ways people interact and behave, and they're matching it with data, right? We're talking about A/B testing. We're talking about statistical significance. We're talking about numbers. I've talked to you about, we implemented KISS metrics. And so I was very much a believer in data. At Lucid, we built out a lot of the early data foundations. At other companies, I've helped them build out the early data foundations. I was very data first. I still am, still a big believer in data. But as I started going down this path and started advising a lot of companies and working with them, started running into companies that were doing, frankly, not well. And the first thing you're like, oh, do you know why you're not doing well? Do you have some data? And they had amazing data. They had great data. They had, in fact, better data than a lot of companies that I've seen. Like, they had analysts there. They had great tooling. It was really clean. They had been really thoughtful. They were checking it weekly, if not daily. They had, 500 different metrics that they were all walking through, and CEO and everybody knew them by heart. And so I had to do some soul searching. Okay. I thought data was important, but clearly here's some companies that are not doing well despite having all the data you could possibly want. And you say, hey, we need to track new data. They would go get it. And I realized there was a few reasons for it. The first is data will never make a decision for you. Like it can't. There's an old like IBM screenshot. I don't know if you've seen it on the IBM manual, and you it was sort of like, you can never blame a computer for doing the wrong thing, right? There's always a human behind it. And a lot of data-driven companies, they try to avoid that. And I think I've gone as far in my writing to say there's fear or worry that you can offload what it means to be the CEO or what it means to be a founder or what it means to be a growth leader to data. You don't have to have your skin in the game and be on the hook for doing the right thing. And the reality is you can't. Until we have fortune telling, you're going to have to look and you're going to have to make a hard decision. And you're going to say, hey, is this the right thing to do or not? And you take a step forward and you can revisit it. You can say, we did the wrong thing after you learn it and you move forward. And so a lot of people think that they can be data driven and offload that. So that's one of the ways that I think people make a mistake, and we can go deeper on that. But basically you think you don't have to be thoughtful, think through things. And the other thing is you see data becoming, and it's related to this, but an excuse, because you can always find these different pieces of data that show different things, right?
Yeah.
It's really common that you ship an A/B test. I bring this up a lot when I talk about funnels with people, because a lot of people like to say, hey, we're going to 10x the number of people who get to our site. We're going to double the conversion rate from people who visit the site to register. And we're going to double the people who register and convert to paid. And it's like, those all move related to each other. Actually, they all interact. And so just having them in isolation. So it's not uncommon that you run a test and you say, wow, we actually tripled the number of people who got to the payment page, but the total number of people has gone in half. Well, what do you do? Right? Like, how do you shift that? And if you want to like throw sticks in the road, but feel like you're being data driven, you can throw sticks in the road because you can go fight data that somewhat disagrees with something.
Yeah.
Hey, like this page, this flow is looking like this. And so this is related to a thought on systems that we could go down. But a lot of people, basically data starts running the org is the summary of all this, right? Data starts running your company. And then you start, instead of shipping towards your goal and getting the result that you want, you start serving data. So you say, hey, instead of doing this thing, let's go look at this data. Oh, this data said this, let's go do that. Let's go, like, you shouldn't do that. Let's look at this data. And you always find these data-driven excuses to not actually get a result. And you forget that the thing you're doing is like building a company. And like, that's what you need to do. And so I think I've gone as far as like, the example I think I wrote in one of my pieces of writing is, if you were to have two types of companies in the most extreme, one that just ships, that's it. They have no idea how many people are coming to their website. They don't know how many people are converting. They just like once a month get like a letter that has their revenue on it. And you have another company that never ships, but has all of the data in the world, has all of the information you want. Which one's going to be better? It's obviously the former. And that's really counterintuitive. You think data-driven is the right thing. And so any data you add to it has to serve the former. It has to help you get results. It has to help you ship faster. It has to help you make more money. Otherwise, you're just like pretending to play business and thinking you're doing cool stuff, but you're looking at numbers and not moving forward.
Yes. Yes. 100%. I love the idea of the local maxima problem. I feel like that sort of illustrates some of what you're saying here, that if you have two hills, you can use data to figure out how to climb this current hill, but it'll never tell you there's another hill over here that you should look over and see and then go climb that hill. And for instance, landing pages, it can tell you you should use this color of button on your landing page, but it wouldn't necessarily tell you, actually, this is a product that should be sold through sales rather than through a landing page, and you should totally switch business model. The data's not going to tell you that if you're not testing it in the first place. How do you think about time horizons? This is another aspect I'm fascinated by, which I think came up in some of your writing. Some of the effects can actually be long-term, and the short-term A/B test might have a different result than the long-term impact of a change.
Yeah. So two ways. I do think it's really, really, really important, because to get the results, you have to have now first, and we can get back to it. But what I mean by this is I'll see people, I'll hear them a lot. They'll say, hey, we just need to lose a lot of money for a little while, and then we'll get to the better place. So, hey, we're converting visit to paid at 10%. If we drop that to 1% for like 6 months, we'll totally be in a place where that goes up to 30%. And it's like, you can't do that. Like that's a hope and a dream. And if you don't want to be data driven, fine. Like that, know that you're doing that and there's a reason for it. But I've never seen it play out well to like basically actively hurt things and then figure it out.
And what's the
later.
justification that people would bring in? Why would they think that would drive 30% results?
There's a bunch of different reasons, but it tends to boil down to some version of like a strategy change that is not informed, right? Hey, we need to shift from talking about, I don't know, Zoom. I haven't looked into the depths of this, but this came up on a call this morning where Zoom, I guess, is trying to become an AI company. I don't know any more than that, but there's a headline, somebody mentioned it in a call. So you can imagine the conversation at Zoom, no inside information, I don't know, where they were like, hey, we're going to take a hit on our video call revenue by like 20. And we're going to focus fully on AI. We're going to change all of our messaging to AI. And like, by the time we're done with that change in 6 months, we're going to be making so much more money as an AI company. And it does constrain you, because then you say, no, we have to stay profitable now. And I think there's paths out of it, like spinning up something on the side and all these different things. But I do think you can't jeopardize your current, like, especially in the startup, like you have to get the results for tomorrow. You have to win. You have to keep winning. But then this is where the monthly annual conversation comes in. Some of the things you do today inform the company you will become. So how can you do things today that are going to help you win today, but are informing a positive vision of the company that you want to become? So can we make sure we get enough revenue on the monthly side that actually is going to help us really build usage and activation? But like when I talk with these people very specifically, I'm like, if you need cash now, if this is what you're doing, you're building a cash flowing business today, a VC round is 3 years out, don't follow this monthly thing. It's actually a bad idea. But you should know that that's the change you're making, and you need to proactively think about activation and usage and these sort of things that are going in, because you're not going to have the money forcing you to think about it. So it's always a little bit of a nuance, but those are the two aspects, which is you've got to make sure you're doing the right thing for the business today. And then within that bound, how does it inform what it becomes?
The survival problem. If you're not around as a company tomorrow, then it doesn't really matter how many brilliant ideas you had for next year.
Totally. Yeah, exactly.
You've written a lot about the middling problem, which, as I understand it, is essentially companies that have reached a large amount of growth, but they're struggling to scale. Can you tell us more of what are the patterns that you see arising for companies in this state?
Yeah. There was this, one of those articles, like I got like more messages from founders that were like, oh man, like emotionally, that article in particular, one of them really, I think hit home for a lot more people. And part of that was I think a post-ZERP era issue in particular, but I think it's still very true today, which is companies that shouldn't have been allowed to be successful, and that the market would have put pressure on them, were allowed to do that. But so there's fewer of them, but there's still a lot. And I think there's a couple aspects. One, I think it tends to be a venture-backed company problem. So they raise venture capital, and part of the reason it's a venture-backed company problem is not because of the money itself. It's because of what they told the VCs they were going to go do. Hey, we're going to go become a video call platform or whatever and compete with Zoom, since that was the analogy we were using. And they then go and they bring the product to market, and they actually get adoption. They get some adoption, and you see this in a bunch of different ways. Sometimes it's because they were really, really free, and maybe they piggybacked on a novel distribution channel, or they were actually really good at one distribution channel, but that channel's gone away or changed or gotten more competitive. But they got this decent adoption, and they got it in a way that didn't have the financial demands, right? So they were probably free, essentially. And a lot of people use free things. And as they were looking to grow, the other thing is a lot of times you'll see like founders like superhumaning sales. So a really, really passionate founder who loves the product and has like a VC network to lean on, or their own network, or they're just like this hardcore hustlers, which a lot of founders are, like they can talk a lot of companies into spending 10 grand. Like you wouldn't believe it, but like you can get a company with a decent product and a really convincing founder to drop like 100 grand in a deal, right? If it's a large company, you're doing a rollout across 100,000 people or whatever, it's not that expensive, and they're getting value. But it turns out it wasn't based on the core value of the product. It was based on like the founder being, pitching a vision and saying, oh yeah, we'll build that, all that stuff. Nothing sketchy, nothing wrong. Like the company knew what they were getting, but
you find you have a
lay
really
salesperson can't repeat it. Yeah. You're not going to hire a founder salesperson that can do that again. So the core essence is like their distribution channel, whether it's sales led or product led, has started to dry up, and it was detached from pure value. So they didn't start with the value first. There's this idea that I really like of taking a step back and saying, hey, what is like the resulting experience someone's going to have? Because if you can make that amazing, then your distribution just really has to be like, here's this amazing experience you're going to have. How incredible that is that. AI is like this. Like, go talk to AI. Whoa, oh my goodness, that's amazing, right? And so that's all they have to do for the distribution. And so if you can get to a place where that's really meaningful, that's the way you want to be. But the companies weren't. They were in this place. And so they hit this sort of S-curve growth where they flattened out. And now they have this really hard decision. So do we go find a new channel? Do we just pour a bunch more effort into our current channel? Or do we shut down? Are often the conversations. And one of the things I've pitched to people is don't shut down. go do something else. Like if you have a team that works well together, you have enough money to keep going, get super profitable, or not even super, just get profitable. So you have somewhat infinite runway, and then go do something else. And a lot of founders at first are resistant to the idea. And this is where the VC funding comes in. Well, it comes in a few aspects, but one of the ways is, no, we told our VCs that we're this. We told them that we're X. We said we're a video call company. We can't possibly go do, I don't know, puzzles online or something. And my pitch is, one, your VC's written you off. If you're like 3 years and you're stuck at, single digit ARR or even low double digits ARR and you're not growing, like your VC's done. They don't care. They're showing up to your board meeting and that's basically it. And two, your VC will be super happy if you find out find $1 billion business that wasn't what they invested in. Like they don't necessarily care. They're not, no offense, but they're not investing in you because you were a video call. They invested in you because they thought a video call company would lead to $1 billion outcome. So if you find $1 billion outcome in puzzle making, awesome, go do that. And that will take some exploration. And this is where the infinite runway comes in, because you need to go practice, you need to go learn, you need to ship these different things. You may have a target market and say, actually, like we were going after Scrum teams in the video call space. And it turns out there's this other thing that Scrum teams would massively love. Let's go build that. Let's go ship it. And you should be able to. And so that's the middling problem, is you hit this weird place where your channels kind of dried up. You didn't actually build something that was really, really valuable to these users and that they would pay you money for it, for the value itself, not for a persuasive salesperson. And now you don't know what to do.
Which is interesting in that it ties back to what you said earlier of, if you're paying monthly, you learn really quickly if users actually want your product, versus with this model, you might find 2 years in, you have a great salesperson, you don't have a great product. What do you do? And I love that solution of maybe try to find another different great product that you can pursue.
Yeah. I mean, it didn't come exactly out of this, but there was some element of it where you'd see people charging annually, and they just never got the usage. So they renew in year one because they're kind of like, yeah, let's try it, we'll get there. And then they churn in year two, like the companies would. And it's like, oh, you took 2 years to learn that people didn't super value what you were building. That's tough.
Which is painful. And it is very reasonable for those purchasing companies that it's not a large amount of money for them. They might be happy to try it out for 2 years. But for you as a startup, the really valuable thing is not necessarily that revenue. It is the signal of, do people actually want the product? And you have a lot of latency on that signal.
Yes.
Another area that you've talked about quite a bit that I find fascinating is the rise of new models of work. And I think you've talked about both remote and also fractional roles. Can you tell us more about this fractional area? How do you see the rise of fractional work?
Yeah. So there's a couple. So what in a lot? So let's just talk about fractional. What it essentially means is that you can get someone to come on in anywhere from the, outside of the CEO role, but you see it in finance a lot. So fractional heads of finance, you see it in, I do fractional product, fractional growth, fractional marketing stuff. And where they come in 1 day, 2 days, 3 days a week, something like that. And they're leading a team, they're delivering these results, they're owning a result. Basically very similar to a full-time employee, but they're not there full-time. And so why is this happening? Well, I think there's a couple reasons it's happening. One is the rise of remote work has allowed this to happen. So instead of sort of this job stacking thing that you've heard people do it secretly, you're sort of upfront saying, you really only need, 50% of my time, and we're going to move this forward. And then the related thing is, in fact, a lot of companies do only need some percentage of your time. And so when you're at a smaller stage, there's this interesting thing that happens, which is you could benefit really, really, really massively from bringing on someone who has experience. But if you bring in that really experienced salesperson for the entire full-time role, you don't have like the ability to absorb their impact through the rest of the organization. And they're going to start pushing on things that maybe don't make sense. They're going to start pushing you in the wrong ways, when really you just want them to come in and make sure you build out like sales team that's going to go get the reps that they need to get, or they're going to go help you like build out the product, but you don't have enough engineers to action on all the stuff they're going to generate. Now there's a counter that's like, hey, they could go lean in these other areas, but it's also like, yes, that's true, but you may not actually want them to go lean in all these other areas because it becomes a distraction, right? They start saying, hey, let's go, I'm going to go lean in on support, I'm going to lean on these other things. The other thing is you can tend to get much higher talent in a way. And so, you look at some people who they're either going to go to that brand name, best in class company, or they're going to do the fractional stuff and they're going to work across multiple companies. And so unless you are that top tier brand name company who you're saying, hey, we're going to go be clearly $100 billion company and it's worth you investing your entire time in this, fractional is this really, really great way to lean in and get a portion of somebody that can be basically more impactful than almost any other full-time hire you could get, but in less than a full-time hire. In a day a week that I've seen, sometimes you can have far more impact in a day and a week than a full-time person can. So all of this is then coupled with the rise of AI in a lot of the remote and what's happening around the cost. And so as people get more impactful, it's as somebody's able to go and actually build stuff. You talk about the one-person billion-dollar company. Well, before you get to the one-person billion-dollar company, you have like the billion-dollar company full of people who are like not working full-time, right? They're working for you in fractional roles in different ways. Gumroad's a really good example where I think they actually send out contracts for all of the things. So the founder goes and says, hey, here's the things I want to go build over the next 90 days. Who's going to go pick it up and go build it? And so it doesn't work for everybody. Again, if you are OpenAI, it probably doesn't work. If you're going and working at SpaceX, it probably doesn't work. But for 90% of these companies out there that even still want to get big, it can be a really great place, especially early on as you get this traction, you bring in expertise that you otherwise just would be really difficult to get access to.
And I can see where it would bring in really high value people, like you said, who might not otherwise want to join some small company that is relatively unknown. But I can also see where you want to build a team of people who are loyal to the company or putting their all into it or thinking about this. What would be the roles that you wouldn't hire a fractional person?
It's a good question. Obviously, I think the CEO would be very difficult. So we'll hold that. I would actually push that I think there are many roles, if not all roles, that if you go in eyes wide open on fractional, they can be better. Because the issue is, the premise of this is, hey, I've hired missionaries, and the way I've just, I don't know if you've heard the missionary, mercenary sort of thing. So Silicon Valley has like this big term of like, I can't remember where it came from, but they're like, you should hire, maybe Paul Graham, missionaries who are signing up for the mission to make it a huge, company, and not mercenaries who are there just for the paycheck. And the argument would be like, well, isn't a fractional person like obviously a mercenary because they're like contracting, they're not full time. And I would actually say, I care a lot about the company that I work with. I want them to be really successful. And the argument is, hey, just because you're giving them like this full-time contract, is they're a missionary. And I've seen that like time and again not be true. And in fact, you see these people that are like, yeah, it's 5:00, like I'm checked out, I'm out. And you may say, hey, it's Tuesday, I'm not available to work with you, I'm there on Monday. But the reality is, like most places you're there, you're successful only if the company is successful. There's a lot of attachment to the success, and we can, you can structure it with equity and all these other same things that you would structure it with a full-time employee. And then you can get cross-pollination where it makes sense. So you can say, hey, we want to go do X. And sometimes I'm like, well, I just did this with 3 different companies and here's how it went. And so it may work this way for you. It may work differently. We can go be successful that way. So it's not the role type that I would avoid it. What you do need to know is you need to go in there, again, eyes wide open. So if you have an engineer and you're saying, hey, this is a fractional role, like show up whenever you want, that's going to be really, really hard. But if you're like, hey, this is our expectation of your availability and what you're going to go do and how much you're going to ship, you can go do that. And so that is where I think, like, if I know there are engineers that I would very much hire for 2 days a week over sort of 80% of the engineers that I've seen at 5 days a week, because they're just that much more productive, that much more successful, and that good. And that's what you're looking for. You're looking for that person that's really going to move your company forward in less than full time. And if you're hiring someone who is like, hey, this is like a middling junior person that's like fresh out of school, I get maybe that's the pitch. Like entry level roles will be very, very hard to hire a fractional person out of it, but fractional tends to be more leadership roles. You're going to help build the team.
Yeah. And that makes a lot of sense. It allows you to hire a more senior person than you could probably afford to hire as a full-time person in that role. And also ties into that concept of the 10x engineer. Would you rather have a fifth of a 10x engineer or 1x engineer? Pretty strong direction that you'd want to go there. Another concept that you've explored that I found really helpful is this idea of operational risk versus opportunity risk. Can you break down for us how you would think about that within marketing?
Yeah. So I think that just to break down what it is in general, a lot of companies, when they're looking at their strategy at a broad level for the whole company in general or within very specific areas, You hear things which is like, should we go do this thing, which is pretty easy to go do. And if it's working, if it's going to work, it could be huge. And if it doesn't work, it could suck or be negligible, right? We just wasted a month or 3 months or a year. That's opportunity risk. The operational risk is if we can accomplish this, it will be huge. We don't know if we can, but we know it will matter a lot. And I really, really passionately believe that the latter is the better way to build a business across the board. You hear it, like you can say, hey, if we go and build this product, we talked about the resulting value, will this be like the most incredible product anybody's ever seen? Yeah, people will be obsessed. No question, people will love it if we can go build that. Okay, figure out how to go build it. And again, on the marketing side, I see this on the marketing side. So, I won't, there were like new platforms launching, for example, and people said in new channels, they said, we don't know if this channel will be a good driver of revenue or not, but we're going to go do it because it's easy. And then we'll go make a bet on the channel and it fizzles out. Instead of saying, hey, look, if we can crack SEO, this will be huge. We know that the market for our product, we can see the keywords, there's so much value here. We're going to go and we're going to go make this big. Now the problem, it's not like in fact, it's very hard because you have to look at yourself and say, what are we not good at? What are we failing at? How do we have to adjust? What do we need to go bring on? Do we need to hire an SEO person? Do we need to go ship? Do you need to show up like every day and work really, really hard? Or bring on a fractional person that can point you in the right direction. But you know that if you are successful there, it will be huge. And that's such an easy, there's no dice roll. Like it's just grit. And so channels is very common that I see people doing this. They just try and make these bet on the next channel. But there's so many channels out there that it's like, hey, if you can making this work, if you can make it work, is huge. So just go figure out how. And put in the reps.
Place a bet on yourself rather than on maybe this has a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow.
Yeah, exactly. And get better. You can get better.
True. That brings us to the lightning round. So these are this or that style question. You can answer very briefly or add a bit of explanation if you would like. Early traction or perfect product?
Or early traction. Easy.
Experiment velocity or experiment quality?
Velocity. Velocity leads to quality.
First-time founders or serial entrepreneurs?
Serial entrepreneurs, generally. Yeah.
Remote first or office culture?
I don't think there's an easy answer there. It really depends on, you got to leverage the best of both. If you're going to be in office, you have to be in office and you have to make it great. And if you are going to be remote, figure out how to make the best out of remote and lean into that. The worst is the middle, like the hybrid. Everyone has to live within 5 miles of the office, but you can work from home. It's like, okay, it's not going to work very well.
Product analytics or customer interviews?
Oh, man, people screw up both. I mean, we talked about how people screw up analytics. So generally customers, but a lot of people try and just also be customer driven and do whatever their customer says. Again, you offload the decision to the other person. That's the problem. You don't want to do that. You got to make the decision yourself.
Quick wins or long-term bet?
I mean, you got to make it tomorrow, right? Quick wins. You got to get what keeps your company going.
Data-driven or intuition-driven decisions?
Data informs your intuition.
Freemium or free trial?
I actually don't think they're an either or. I think that's a big misconception in the industry that I hear a lot, but freemium as a base level, you get more reps for them to upgrade.
Small profitable markets or large competitive market?
You have to win today and then you can grow. So you start with small profitable ones, but you can grow into the big competitive ones.
Well, fantastic. Yeah. Thank you, Joe. That is our interview. I'll hand over some time to you. How can people learn more about you and how can they engage with you if they want more of your expertise?
Amazing. I mean, you referenced a lot of my writing, which I'm really thankful for. I as we talked, I put a lot into it and I love it. So Artisan Strategies at Substack, artisanstrategies.substack.com is the best place to go. And then you can find me on LinkedIn or on X, Twitter, or artisangrowthstrategies.com. And we can put some links, I think, in the show notes or something like that. Yeah.
Fantastic. And what sorts of clients are you looking for in Artisan Strategies?
The way I think about it is anybody who is reaching a broad swath of people. So that product-led growth motion. So if you are doing that $1 million deal, account-based marketing on the enterprise, not me. People who are really, really good at that, but it's not me. And if you need to like tap into the zeitgeist of like, we're hip and cool and we have like this cool celebrity like using our stuff, also not me. But if you're really subscription-based in general, you're reaching out to a broad group of people, but I've worked in marketplaces, ad tech, finance, software-based generally though, and broad groups of people, generally where I thrive.
Fantastic. Well, thanks for coming on, Joe. Have a great rest of your evening.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Thanks, Nate.